Hey everyone, this is Jeremy Newman at the Family Freedom Project. I'm here again outside the courthouse in Fort Worth. We just had our second full day of testimony in Evelyn Boatwright's case. You guys can see our update from yesterday to hear how the first day went. But today we heard testimony from three different people, really two that were key to kind of moving the needle in this case. The first one was from the CPS caseworker who actually conducted the removal of Evelyn back on February 10th of this year. And it was kind of remarkable, I mean, actually really remarkable, the testimony that came out from this caseworker, where she testified that she was called to the hospital, and when she got there, she never spoke to a single doctor who had treated Evelyn, not a single one. Her entire investigation as to whether or not the condition of this child warranted a removal did not involve speaking to a single doctor who had treated Evelyn. But nonetheless, she was making medical determinations about Evelyn's condition without speaking to any of those doctors. And one of those was that she herself, the caseworker, who at this point had only been a caseworker for 7 months, testified that she had ruled out herself the possibility that any of Evelyn's injuries could have been due to birth trauma without having spoken to a single doctor at all about the case. And the doctors themselves testified that they did not review the medical records from Evelyn's birth before they made any of their determinations either. And another thing that's really significant is we passed a law recently in Texas that requires caseworkers to inform families of their rights before they interview the caseworker, before they interview the parents. Well, in this situation, the caseworker testified that she went in to an interview that the police did with the parents. The police did not Mirandize the parents before doing that interview, and the caseworker sat in on that interview and got all of that information without reading the parents their rights either, and thereby kind of skirting the law that requires the caseworker to read the parents their rights before asking the parents questions. And this was really crazy that she said this out loud, actually, is that Texas law, one of the things it requires is that a caseworker demonstrate that they made reasonable efforts to avoid the need for removal of the child. And the parent's attorney went through a list of all of the things that the caseworker had failed to do, and at the end of it, she asked the caseworker, what reasonable efforts did you make to avoid the need for removing this child? And the caseworker said, none. And then she said, well, what efforts of any kind did you make to avoid the need for removal of this child? And the caseworker again said, none. No efforts at all. And that was borne out by the individual examples. Here's one of the biggest ones. Texas law also requires that the caseworker attempt to place the child with family. Now, despite the family having given, well, first, despite multiple family members being present at the hospital to take Evelyn, and despite the caseworker having been given the names of multiple family members, other family members who were available, none of those were pursued. And then 10 minutes after the removal was conducted, she received a call from the police investigator who told her that the maternal grandmother was available for placement, and the caseworker testified that she did nothing at all to follow up on that possibility and get Evelyn placed with the grandmother. Didn't inform her supervisor, didn't go back to the hospital and inform them that there actually was an alternative solution to removal. And she literally testified that there were options available for which she could have avoided the need for removal, but she didn't do those things. So that's just a flagrant violation of Texas law. And then the next most significant testimony was from one of the parents' witnesses. His name is Dr. Auer. And his testimony, first of all, he's a specialist in brain damage. And one of the biggest accusations in this case is shaken baby syndrome, that they're accusing the parents of having shaken Evelyn so hard somehow that they injured the inside of her brain. And this doctor's testimony, essentially, in a nutshell, is he said, well, first of all, the evidence that Cooks itself collected demonstrates that Evelyn had probably an infection and probably a virus, both of which would have contributed to the weakening of the blood vessels in her vein that would have led to bleeding on its own, right? And that the bleeding in her brain is explainable by that, but that the doctors didn't seem to understand that that's what the tests indicated, so they stopped looking for any of those things. They assumed child abuse, And as soon as child abuse became the diagnosis, none of those other things were followed up on at all. He's also, by chance, a specialist in bone health. And so one of the accusations in Evelyn's case is about cracked ribs, and she's an infant, and his testimony was people don't understand that 50% of infants, up to 50% of them, have asymptomatic rib fractures, and that it's a normal part of, first, the birthing process, and second of all, the growth process, because babies have extremely pliable ribs, and rib fractures in babies are often asymptomatic because, the natural ones at least, because they're not causing harm to the child. It's simply a process of the ribs, the bone strength not being able to keep up with the growth, and they heal on their own, and it's no big deal, and nobody would ever even know about it but for an x-ray that happens to find them. And so his point was, up to half of babies who would have come into this hospital would have had asymptomatic rib fractures on their own. But when these doctors looked at that, not only did they not inquire into the circumstances of her birth, they assumed that it must have been due to abuse. And that same doctor is going to be coming back tomorrow to finish his testimony, and then there will be 2 more expert witnesses from the family testifying tomorrow. So that will be the last day of testimony. Tomorrow we'll give you guys an update on how that concludes. At this point, the summary of things from where we stand now seems to be that the doctors at Cook's and CPS both repeatedly failed to do their due diligence, both on the medical front and on the legal front, to find alternative diagnoses for what could be going on, or to avoid the need for removing this child. And having made all of those errors, they're now refusing to walk it back. And the cost, of course, falls on the baby and the family. So thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll give you guys another update based on how things go tomorrow.